calories in 1 liter of, let's say, canola oil. 1 liter has 8,840 calories. 840 times 11. That's 97,000 calories of oil per day. Hit me, producer Potts.
Okay, so you've convinced me to try canola oil.
Yay!
Great. And, we've been going through all these videos on why linoleic acid, omega-6, which is the most common found fat in most vegetable oils, although we just learned that's a little different than canola oil, which is also mind-bending. I'll put that video here because I know I'm just taking you guys all over the place. Okay, so that's actually all good for you, right? Health promoting.
Yes.
Even though it's showing that there's health benefits from these oils, aren't they all heavily processed? So where does that all fall into line so far as quality?
I feel like there's multiple parts to that question. I think the top line answer is that whatever vegetable oils you have access to are health promoting vegetable oils to choose. So the industrial seed oils, the processed oils, the fear mongering around the processing, the video that's all over social media where you see the goo being extracted from the oil, the stuff that they're removing from the oil, but then saying that that's the oil. Anyways, that is there to propel the fear mongering, and it is not actually showing a good understanding of what the steps of the processing are and what that does to the final oil. So there's a lot of myths around that. So the top line is there's nothing wrong with that processing. No, there's not chemical solvents left in the final oil. No, the final oil is not oxidized and rancid. All of that's myths, and we can go through those points one by one. So whatever vegetable oil you can find and that you like and have access to and can afford, that's the great one to use in your kitchen. But side note, if you feel really uncomfortable with that processing, even after we go through all of the myths, almost all vegetable oils are available in an expeller pressed form, which means cold pressed, which means no heat. A lot of them are available organically, which means no chemical solvents. So you can get a form of these oils that doesn't have that processing. For all of them, the expeller pressed corn oil is extremely expensive, but it's not such a big differential for things like canola oil or sunflower seed oil, or cottonseed oil even. So there is a expeller pressed, cold pressed version of it if that is something that is important to you. But let's go through the myths so that hopefully even that you can see is not something to worry about.
Yeah. I guess the first question, in those myths is even if we're talking about, vegetable oils or olive oils, they're all processed, right? So they're all processed regardless of the oil. They just have different processing. But are these oils that are processed out, not the cold press, but the normal stuff that you would just pick up at the grocery store, is that considered an ultra processed food?
Oh, no, it is not. So in the NOVA classification system, there's 4 classes of foods. So there's unprocessed. So that is the food as it is found in nature. There's processed culinary ingredients, and that's where vegetable oils fall. So these are basically minimally processed. So there's a small amount of processing that happens, but most of the inherent nutrients are still intact, and they're ingredients that are used for culinary purposes. There is processed foods, so foods that undergo a little bit more processing but still have the majority of their nutrients intact. So this would include things like whole wheat bread. And then there's ultra processed foods. So foods that no longer have all of the nutrients intact and have a lot of added sugar, added oils, potentially preservatives and other additives. So ultra processed foods is NOVA classification 4. Processed culinary ingredients like vegetable oil is NOVA classification too. So not an ultra-processed food. Just because a food has vegetable oil as an ingredient doesn't mean automatically that it's ultra-processed. It could be in Nova Class 3. So again, right, that whole wheat bread is a processed food, not an ultra-processed food. That might have, some vegetable oil as an ingredient. So no, it is not an ultra-processed food. It may be added to ultra-processed foods, but its addition doesn't automatically make a food ultra-processed.
Okay. So what about oxidation? Am I saying that right?
Yeah.
That is something that comes up a lot where people, or they say like all vegetable oils are rancid. I would never put that in my body. Like, can you explain that to us?
Yeah, so that comes from the idea that unless you have cold pressed, so the more like, I'm going to say industrial in the sense of like large scale, right? So where you can use like really big equipment to help like make that extraction of the oil very, very efficient. So that's what I mean by industrial when I say it here. So that large scale extraction, it can be done with heat. But when it is done with heat, it is also done under pressure. So under pressure, think of like your pressure cooker, like your Instant Pot. When it comes to pressure, there's no oxygen. Oxygen can't get in there. So you cannot oxidize without oxygen. Like oxidize means reacting with oxygen to form an oxidant, right? To form a version of that molecule with some oxygen attached that makes it a like highly reactive molecule or damages it in some way. So without oxygen, it cannot oxidize. So yes, if you were to just boil a bunch of oil in a pot on your stove, and that's open to the air, so it's open to oxygen, that will over time oxidize the oil. It's one of the reasons why if you're using whatever oil you're using to deep fry, you only want to use it so many times before you swap it out and use a completely new oil. In practice at home, if you're doing deep frying, by the time that oil doesn't taste good anymore, that's when it's time to switch it. So like 8 to 12 uses, provided you never exceed the smoke point, is kind of a good gauge. But that's so you can, and the reason why you want to do that is because that oil will oxidize over time, which does damage the oil and does make it not a healthy thing for us to consume. But in the extraction of vegetable oils, it's not just in a big vat boiling open to the air, open to oxygen. It's under pressure. So that prevents oxidation. So that is a really important part of it's not like we learn about industrial processes and like all of the different equipment and how this works in school. Like this isn't part of most people's education unless you have a degree in food science, right? Like, so, if you don't know that, that's fine. Like nobody taught you, like, it's okay. That's not something most people know. But now you know that when oils are extracted under high heat, they're also done under pressure. So there's no oxygen.
So it's not rancid. Not rancid.
It's
we
not
don't
rancid.
have to worry about that. Great.
And there's actually further steps of processing after the initial extraction that actually not only lower the possibility of like rancidity, but actually make the oil more shelf stable over time by removing other components that could be in the oil that can act like a chain reaction. So one of the things to know about vegetable oils is that every batch has to be tested for something called lipid peroxidation, which is like a measurement of the starting amount of that oil that is oxidized. And it's tightly regulated, so what it's allowed to be before it gets bottled and put on store shelves. And the reason why it's tightly regulated is because it's kind of like a chain reaction. So that little bit that's oxidized will like almost like speed up how quickly the rest of it can oxidize over time. So you want a very, very small amount to start with to have a very shelf stable oil. If you start with a somewhat oxidized oil, it is going to go rancid, which it will taste and smell bad if it goes rancid. It will go rancid faster over time. And it's one of the issues that, for example, fish oil manufacturers have had like historically some challenges with, is like higher levels of oxidation. So fish oil that goes rancid faster. That's a whole separate conversation. But it is like a known issue in some industries for oils. With vegetable oils, it's very tightly regulated. So the lipid peroxidation levels when it's bottled have to be extremely low. And again, there's like multiple steps in the extraction that are aimed at ensuring that that initial level of oxidation is very low so that you'll have a very, very long shelf life for that oil.
Okay, well that's that busted then. Okay, what about the fact of all these chemical solvents like hexane being used? Can you explain that to us?
Yeah, for sure. So hexane is a solvent, which means it makes oil-soluble things dissolve, and it can be used in the initial step of the extraction, actually before the heating. And that's important because there's an initial sort of gentle heating that helps the hexane to evaporate before you get the pressure and that the higher temperature heating for the full extraction. So hexane basically helps the oil separate from the other plant parts in that initial step of the extraction. But in addition to it, evaporating in like part of that first step, there's other steps that occur to make sure that the hexane or whatever other chemical solvents are used are removed. So once the oil is extracted, a bleaching clay is used. That's not bleach. That it means like a clay is used kind of like a filter, kind of used to like attract molecules that we don't want in that finished oil. And that removes other things that might make the oil go rancid faster in storage. So things like chlorophyll and carotenoids, phytonutrients that we ideally want in our whole diet, but that if that's in our vegetable oil, the vegetable oil won't have as long of a shelf life. Then the oil is deodorized, and that again removes potential contaminants that we don't want, like pesticide residues, like heterocyclic amines, another really beneficial step of the processing. And then finally, it's filtered. So again, we're removing anything left that might give this vegetable oil a odor or a flavor. That's why vegetable oils tend to have a very neutral flavor, almost no smell, is because of these, various steps that are pulling out things that make the oil less stable. And so the finished oil has a longer shelf life. It can sit in your pantry for typically years before it goes rancid if it's undergone all of these steps, most of which are done mechanically. So most of which are, putting that oil through a mechanical filter. It's just that initial step with a solvent that's done chemically. I guess clay is kind of like somewhere in between. But it is, all of these processes are to actually make a higher quality product at the end, not one that will easily go rancid in your home. So the processing is actually a really good thing.
Yeah, so this is interesting. So the hexane that, we're all told to, be afraid of is actually used in the very beginning of the process. It's not even actually used when they get down to actually processing the oil. And the fact that we hear this word of like solvents and bleach, it's not actually bleach the way we think of bleach. And then there's these steps to just, like you said, make it a more shelf stable product. Now, this has got my mind thinking then, because are there other products out there that we view as health promoting that also go through like these big industrial processes? I'm assuming there are, and maybe we've just demonized oils in this way. Can you give us some examples?
I don't know if you meant that to be a leading question or not, but it was the excellent question. Because collagen peptides go through a very similar number of steps, including hexane being used in the initial solvent extraction. And collagen peptides have a wonderful health halo around them as being like this incredibly important thing to add to your I add collagen peptides to my coffee.
We all use collagen. What are you talking about?
to show that collagen peptides are like a great protein to incorporate into a diverse, nutrient-focused diet. We wouldn't want it to be our only protein because it's not a complete protein, but it's definitely a good one to incorporate. We've done videos on collagen before, and I'm assuming Producer Potts, you can put a link here to those videos. But yeah, they actually go through very similar steps to be produced. They actually additionally go through an enzymatic breakdown step, which is not something that vegetable oils undergo. But yeah, I think there's also like an additional, like, let's drill down on hexane just a tiny little bit here, because that is where so much fear is centered with vegetable oils. So the vast majority of vegetable oils have 0 measurable hexane at the end, right? So all of those other steps to remove other contaminants, remove other things that we don't want concentrated in the oil, also make sure that there's no residual hexane. However, sometimes trace amounts are measurable, and I have some numbers in front of me. So there was a study, I can't remember what year this study was published in. Let me find that out. 2008. That looked at the amount of hexane in a bunch of different oils. And the highest amount of hexane, there was some in olive oil in the study, by the way. That's not normally part of the extraction process for olive oil. But the highest concentration of hexane in all of the oils that they tested was 0.4 milligrams per kilogram, which is 1.1 liters of oil. This is where the dose makes the poison is a really important concept, right? Just because something is present in a food that might be harmful, that does not mean that the amount that is in that food is harmful. So this is where we want to understand things like acceptable daily intake levels or provisional chronic reference doses when there's not enough data to establish an acceptable daily intake. That's what we're talking about with hexane. The provisional chronic reference dose is 0.06 milligrams per kilogram body weight per day. So we typically do this math with a 70 kilogram person. That's 154 pounds. Scale up or down if you are, heavier or lighter than that amount. But that standard 70 kilogram person would have to consume 11 liters of that highest measured amount of hexane oil from that study of vegetable oil every day in order to hit the chronic reference dose for hexane. So in order to start worrying about hexane.
Well, that's
every
just
day.
Never happening.
I would not recommend drinking 11 liters of oil.
Okay, so that's null and void then. Like, it's just the tiniest trace amount. So, but then also, does it bear out that collagen would then have those similar small amounts of hexane, or do we not have the studies to show that?
I am not sure that I've seen a study that measures whether or not there's trace hexane in final collagen peptides.
My question is, I guess,
I don't know.
My point in that is, like, if we've been consuming collagen powder for all these years and we like how it makes us feel and it's great, then we really need to get over this like vegetable oil thing with the hexane, because
for sure. I'm not trying to make us afraid of collagen peptides. I'm trying to use collagen peptides as an example for why we should not be afraid of vegetable oils.
Right. Yes, exactly. That was kind of, well, that's fascinating then, well, then that just shuts that right down.
Yes. So even when it is detectable, like most of the time, there's no hexane detectable in vegetable oils. And we've removed other potentially, other contaminants that might be a problem, like heterocyclic amines, which are they're linked with cancer. They're part of the wonderful browning things that are produced when we grill foods that we've talked about previously, can be counteracted by consuming things like spices and cruciferous vegetables, but we still don't want to like intentionally increase how much we're consuming if we can. So those are removed in the processing, right? Pesticide residues are removed in the processing. Any chemical solvents used in that initial extraction step are also removed in the processing. All of that stuff makes a cleaner, flavorless, odorless oil that lasts longer on our shelves. So we don't need to worry about any of it. But even that like tiny trace amount of hexane that's left, it's so much smaller than the levels that we need to be, like, so hundreds of times lower than the levels where we would need to start being concerned, that when you crunch the numbers, you end up with something ridiculous like drinking 11 liters, which is nearly, I guess it's nearly 3 gallons
that's never gonna happen,
of oil
right,
per day.
per
Like
day.
for the chronic like the chronic toxicity dose, not
Meaning
acute
you have to do
toxicity,
that day
chronic
after day
toxicity,
after day
every
after
single
day
day.
for it to build up.
You're going to have
Gotcha.
way more problems from consuming. Sorry, I need to calculate how many calories that would be. Hold, please. That's 97,000 calories of oil per day. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay. Will you write this down so I can put this in the show notes for people so they have this little fun factoid to give their friends when
For
their
sure.
friends go, but what about the hexane?
I think I may go back and edit my article to add that, because that's just a
It's a great
fun fact.
to throw out there. No, we should, and yeah, please pass it to me. I'll put it in the show notes, everyone, and that way you can
90
send
specifically
it to
97,240.
your friends.
That's the number of calories
That's great.
worth of oil every single day in order for the trace amounts of hexane to be a problem.
So essentially, when we see that viral video that everyone uses to scare us about seed oils and we see all the gross sludge and everything, it's not actually a representation of what's even close to going into the finished product. And beyond that, if we were to probably watch the process of many of the foods that we have health halos on, and we would see how they're processed in these large amounts in these factories through these machines, we probably wouldn't like that either, right? So like, also
anything that has a step that occurs in a vat. Do you know what I mean? Like,
right,
a vat of something is generally not appealing looking. Like, if you could have a vat of stew and it still won't look good because it's a vat of stew as opposed to a pot of stew. So
we've all seen those conveyor belts with all the food, and that's just not appealing, versus you walk into a grocery store and things look very appealing. So also, I think it's just,
plus it's chocolate. I feel like conveyor belts of chocolate are still tasty looking.
well, yeah, I think we have I Love Lucy to thank for that.
Yeah.
So for sure.
Yeah, insert clip of
insert clip. That's great. Well, I think we've done this series of videos on vegetable oils. I think you've given us the sledgehammer. We've covered every single myth, argument, talking point. But everyone, if you have something in the comments that you want to drop that you're curious about, remember, approach with curiosity and kindness. Put it in there. If it's a genuine question, we might pick it for a follow-up video, or Sarah might be in the comments answering questions. We'll see how that goes. And yeah, I hope that all of these videos were very helpful. So if you've missed them all, there will be a playlist. I'll make sure to put that in the show notes as well, so you can catch up on everything that we're talking about. Because if this is the first video you saw, no, you need to watch the other ones too.
It's hopefully, with any luck, the last one of the series.
The last one of the series.
Potentially before the follow-up questions. But also, all of this information is written up in a very, very detailed article on Nutrivore.com, which I know Producer Potts will also link for you. That has, I can't remember, 86 scientific citations, most of which are systematic reviews and meta-analyses that pool together data from many different studies themselves. So it's all the highest level of scientific evidence, all of the science that, is already evaluated for things like funding bias and study design quality, so that we're just looking at the highest quality, most contemporary scientific evidence to build this case for vegetable oils being good for us. So also, please go read that article. All of the studies are also directly linked, so everything is super transparent for you to go and read the studies for yourself. Not every study is publicly available, sadly, so unless you have access to like a university library, you might not be able to read every single one. That is a bigger problem in scientific research that we can talk about in another video. But as many of them as possible are also publicly available for you to go read. But I've tried to be, I've tried to show all of my work and have everything laid out there, like really systematically for you, because I understand this myth has been around for a long time. It's wide and it's deep. And so it requires a really thorough myth busting to counteract just how pervasive this myth is.
Thank you, Dr. Sarah.
Thank you.